Hey, friends, welcome back. I'm Adrienne Balkum, and I'm so glad you've joined me today. I hope you're having a fantastic week. We've got a lot to cover, including several important updates from around Rockwall County. Then I'm excited to sit down with today's special guest for what I think is going to be a thoughtful conversation about leadership, ethics, and public trust. The Texas Department of Family and Protective Services has announced a major change affecting foster care services across North Texas. Empower will no longer oversee foster care management for 9 counties, including Rockwall County. The transition follows an extensive state assessment citing serious concerns, including multiple cases where children were placed in imminent danger. Oversight over those services will now move to Texas Family Care Network and Our Community, Our Kids. It's certainly a developing story that impacts vulnerable children and families throughout our region. We also have an update on the Rule 202 petition filed by Bryan McNeal and Dennis London. Since our previous episode, the record reflects several filings, including an amendment filing on July 2nd, a motion to substitute counsel on July 14th, two proposed orders, and a Rule 11 agreement. Ultimately, the Rule 202 proceeding was withdrawn by attorney Casey Ashmore, bringing that matter to a close. As always, I'll continue following future filings if anything new develops. There's also movement in the lawsuit involving D.O. Horton, River Rock Development, and Rockwall County. The parties have agreed to temporarily pause the litigation for up to 60 days while they work toward finalizing a settlement agreement. On July 14th, 2026, during Commissioners Court, Commissioners also voted 4-0 to hire Brenda McDonald as special counsel to represent Roncal County and the remaining defendants throughout the process. We'll see where those negotiations lead over the next couple of months. And finally, over in Fate, the city received formal notice on July 9th that Messer Fort PLLC will end its legal representation of the city effective July 20th. Attorney transitions aren't uncommon in municipal government, but given everything that's happened in Fate over the past year, this is certainly another development worth following. Speaking of Fate, today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to. Local governments works best when residents trust their leaders. Residents place their trust in elected officials, city staff work behind the scenes to keep essential services running, and every decision has the potential to strengthen or weaken that trust. Today's conversation is about what happens when trust is tested, why ethics matter in public service, and what communities can do to move forward. Joining me today is someone who has spent years serving the Fate community and cares deeply about its future. My guest today is Autumn Lobinsky. Autumn has called Fate home for nearly 2 decades and brings both professional leadership experience and a long history of community service. She has spent more than 25 years working in the healthcare industry, where collaboration, accountability, and serving others have been at the heart of her career. Here in Fate, Autumn has devoted countless hours to public service. She served as the original chair of the city's Charter Review Commission, later returned as a member of the 2025 Charter Review Commission, and most recently served as vice chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission. Through those roles, she's helped shape important conversations about the city's future while gaining firsthand insight into how local government operates. Away from City Hall, Autumn enjoys teaching dance, spending time with her dogs and grandpup, and making memories with her family. Today, we're talking about ethics in local government, restoring public trust, leadership during challenging times, and what residents should be looking for as Fate prepares for this November's election. Autumn, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Before we jump into today's conversation, I'd love for listeners to get to know you a little bit. You served the city of Fate in several different volunteer leadership roles over the years, but like many people listening, they all started with simply choosing a place to call home. So let's start there. What first brought you and your family to Fate?
Well, I'm originally from the northwest suburbs of Chicago, so born and raised in Illinois. My family's still all up there. In 2006, we decided we did not like the cold winters anymore, and we had some family that lived down in this area in North Texas. So we had them kind of scope out a house. And when my sister in law did, she found fate. And I was sold the minute she started sending me pictures of the town and things like that. So we built a house down here and moved here in 2007.
One thing you'll hear mentioned occasionally is the term MUD or municipal utility district. These districts help finance infrastructure like roads and utilities in many fast growing communities across Texas. And they're often part of conversations about growth and development here in Rockwall County, or PID, which stands for Public Improvement District. Out of curiosity, did you move into one of those newer developments or were you part of one of Fate's older neighborhoods?
I did not. I actually we call ourselves the OG South Side of Fate. So we are on our half acre lots with no sewer service. We're all septic out here, no muds. Very very quiet in my neighborhood on the south side where we are.
One of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation is because it's easy to view local government through social media posts or headlines, but behind every public meeting are real people who care deeply about their community, even when they disagree. My hope today is that listeners get to know you not simply as someone who has served on commissions, but as a resident who wants to see fate continue to succeed. When you think about the community you've called home for nearly 20 years, what does good leadership look like to you?
I think that's pretty much how anybody should feel is just expect good leadership, expect that, the place that you have chosen to call home, raise your family, do your day-to-day lives, you want to make sure it's, top notch and that the people who are leading it have the best interests for everybody in the community.
For listeners outside Rockwall County, let's paint a picture of fate. If someone has never visited before, how would you describe the community today?
I still consider Fate almost like an infant community. We've been a lot around for a very, very long time. When I moved here, there was, I think, about 2,000, 2,500 people here. Currently, based on, we don't have a census for another couple of years, but we're slowly creeping up to that 30,000 mark. A lot of us would consider in the early stages a bedroom community, basically just houses, things like that. We do have some apartments that are out there right now, not many. We have more entitled than we actually have built right now, but for the most part it is single family homes. Mostly just it started off when I moved here was a lot of newer families because it was an affordable place to live that was close to Rockwell, close to Royce City, kind of, when I moved here was only 25 minutes to drive to Dallas, which we know that's not the case anymore. It's a very unique community because the majority of Fate's major thoroughfares are all TxDOT roads, including the I-30 corridor. So our main bread and butter to get here is I-30. And so being a bedroom community on a major east-west thoroughfare gives you Fate a very unique opportunity to still have that small community, single families, or even the older community be all in the same affordable area, but be able to, have some diverse kind of commercial business, which is slowly starting to come in, especially within probably about the last 5 years. We've really seen a commercial boom to be able to subsidize some of the city infrastructure, the costs to the citizens, and start get growing a tax base. So while I feel like we're in our infancy when it comes to that, I think, eventually fate will be able to be a destination place on the map for people to go, but also allow the people that live here to not have to go to multiple different cities to do their daily affairs.
Mhm. One of the things that I've been hearing recently is that Kroger is coming to Fate. Is that true?
Yes, so Kroger broke ground, I believe it was it I can't remember if it was the end of last year in 2025 or the beginning of 2026, but they broke ground. There's an entire development coming in called Lafayette Crossing, which is supposed to have 2 major retail anchor stores, one being Kroger, one yet to be announced, along with some additional shopping areas. And then that also will bring in additional homes. Oh, there are some apartments, a limited number of apartments that will be entitled to go there. But it was a very unique arrangement where the developers had an agreement with the city of Fate that all the commercial was built before they can do a lot of the housing part of it.
As Fate continues growing, do you think the community has shared vision of what it wants to become, or is the city still discovering its identity?
That's a very interesting question. And the reason I say that is, we are a growing community, but in my personal opinion, I don't think Fate has established their identity yet to know what it's supposed to look like or what the vision for it is yet. You know, I think we are in the middle of updating our comprehensive plan. And I think that's going to have a lot to do with it to be able to kind of define what that identity is. Now, we have some small things going on in the downtown area, but we have a very limited small downtown area. So, trying to, the proverbial put all the eggs in one basket, I'm not sure that's going to be a good long-term decision for Fate, but we have a really great opportunity right now to kind of define what that identity is going to look like, what we want people to think of Fate coming in. And that's a hurdle right now, but it's also an opportunity for us to, with these developers coming in, with the recent approval of Fate Yards on our last corner of the I-30 corridor, that is supposed to be an entertainment destination. I think that it's really gonna start helping to define what Fate's vision is going to be.
Oh, well, what's that about? You said what was it called? Fate Yards?
Fate Yards, yes, it's a new, development that's gonna be going in on the south side, just basically across, 551 from Fresh Brookshires. So, it is based on the concept plan. There is no housing, it is all commercial-based, entertainment-based, multiple different kinds of unique restaurants, unique shops. Even on the map, there's things of, like, a movie theater being there, some kind of indoor entertainment area, a fountain area similar to based on the concept drawings and things like that. It looks similar to what you would see in Rockwall at the harbor, with potential of, like, permanent food carts being there for ice creams and things like that. Just a great place where the people from Fates can bring their families and not have to sit in traffic to get anywhere. In addition to that, also drawing people from other areas to come visit Fate and see what Fate all has to offer.
Oh, that is wonderful to hear. It sounds like this wasn't something that happened overnight. Was there a lot of public input and long-range planning behind the project?
It's really interesting. So as I said, they are working on the comprehensive plan, and in their first meeting before Fate Yards came across to them, the number one thing that all of these working groups and the members of the comprehensive plan said that the biggest thing was entertainment. Now, this particular project, while it has just come in front of city council, I believe it was the last meeting or the meeting before, and the planning and zoning commission prior to that, this is a corner that has been in discussions with our development department, our planning and zoning, our economic development for multiple years. There have been multiple iterations of concept plans that have come there that have been turned down because all of them included additional uh, multifamily housing, which is something that Fate has a lot of multifamily housing entitled, so they're not apt to want to allow additional multi family housing because they want to make sure we can fill out what's already entitled. So this is probably about 3 to 4 years in the making of getting the development actually what they wanted. About 2 years ago, they had come with their last big plan, and the sitting city council at that time said, "Hey, this is a great plan. Just, can you remove the housing? Because we just can't approve it as it is with the housing." And so back to the drawing board, they, worked with a developer who could come in and really give Fate what their vision for it, what the planning department's vision was for it. And I think they did great. It was a long time coming, multiple years, things like that.
I think that's encouraging for listeners because sometimes it's easy to focus on controversy, but communities are also continuing to plan and grow and invest in the future. One of the themes that comes up over and over in local government is civic engagement. From your perspective, Autumn, are more residents becoming involved in city government or is there still work to do?
I will always say there's never enough civic involvement. So when we did the charter back in 2009, 2010, we were a town of 5,000 people. And the voting statistics and people who got involved, and it was very low at the time because we had a limited amount of people. As the years have gone on, move on back to, I'm going to go to 2025 since we first wrote the charter, where I was the chair for that one, and moved to 2025. It has not civic involvement has not increased at the proportion of the population. So, back in 2010, maybe about 600 voters at that time would come out and vote, which at that time for a town of 5,000 wasn't terrible, right? But then you move to 2025 at the last election or even the 2026 election, and we only have about 1,100, 1,200 like, consistent voters. Now, this last election had our highest voting records, which was still under 2,000 people, and for a town of about 18,000 voters, my wish by doing this podcast, by speaking out, by giving out information is just be involved. We need more civic involvement because we don't want 6, 700 people deciding what fate wants to look like. Fate is a young community. Our demographics are very young when it comes to, I mean, we're not starter families, but we are families nonetheless. Our average median age, I believe, is 33, 34. We need to make sure that they have just as much input in what's going in because these are people that have bought their homes here that are probably going to stay through the time that their kids are out of school and things like that, just like I have.
Mhm,
Uh, and we need to make sure I will always push that we need more people involved, more people just being curious.
mhm. Yeah, I'm a very big, supporter of, like, if you don't know something, ask questions. I don't think there is really any stupid questions out there, but then again, I mean, I can be surprised. So, speaking of surprises, were you surprised that 9 residents volunteered for the recent city council appointment?
For a very short answer, no, I was not surprised. I think we got to a point in fate because, as I don't want to dwell on negative, we got to the point where people had a choice to either ignore it, look away of what's going on in fate, you know, let's try to make it look like a Rockwall Heath because they look like they have it together on the face value. But I think what happened is now we have residents that are finally paying attention, and it allows people to recognize that there are deficiencies and there are ways to improve and get a government body or staff that is a better reflection on the long-term vision of fate. And I think that's kind of why we've had a little bit more engagement. I mean, even our elections only include for, two candidates, 2 to 3 candidates per spot. So we had more people want to apply to be appointed to city council than we've ever had, I think, in an election at all.
Well, running for office isn't easy, especially today. Candidates know they'll face criticism and public scrutiny. Do you think that that's discouraging some people from serving, or are you beginning to see the opposite?
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking because we had people, and I watched the interviews and things like that. There were people from all walks of life. Not just the same people that we see come up all the time. People who have history in board of trustees for school districts, applicants who came in from HR organizations, applicants that came in from big corporate environments, just kind of the gamut all over the place. Even if it was people we had never heard, but there was so much knowledge in each of those individuals that, it kind of gave me hope that people are saying, hey, you know what? I'm not just going to sit back and watch anymore. I want to be involved. And I applaud anybody who takes the first step. And that's all it is it's the first step.
So I'm assuming that you've gone to the town halls, and I kind of want to get a sense of, how have they been going? And I mean, what's the residents are the, what listening to the questions that were being asked or concerns, what are people bringing up at these town halls?
So the town halls have been led by our mayor, and I applaud that. We're getting some town halls in there. A lot of it, like the first town hall, he is doing a series of 5. So the first town hall was some very basic state of the city information, along with some questions regarding recalls, ethics complaints. It was more lecture style versus conversational. At that town hall, the citizens really didn't have the opportunity to have like back and forth dialogue because the questions were gathered on paper and read by a proctor.
Well, let's say, who you said read by who?
Just a representative who the mayor had asked to read the questions.
Uh,
Like, he never skipped out on any of the wording or, as far as we know, he read every single question, but the citizens weren't allowed to ask those questions. So, it was more I guess you can call it more lecture style.
okay. And what kind of questions are they asking? I mean, do you remember any of the questions that were being brought up?
A lot of questions about, this was more basic city information. So questions about, some of the developments going on in Fate, a lot of questions about the comprehensive plan because they had just kicked off the comprehensive plan. So the mayor kind of explained what that process looks like, things like that. So, it was more state of the city as opposed to, you know, really kinda diving into some, I don't wanna say controversial questions, but more questions that are gonna take a little bit more deep thought.
Okay, and so these are town halls being hosted by the mayor. How are they how is the city or the mayor I'm not sure how it works, as far as, like, getting the word out to invite people to come to the town hall. I mean, how is that information getting out to attend this?
In all honesty, the only thing that I have seen that has talked about town halls is the mayor creates the event on his Facebook candidate page, and he shares it out from there, and it gets shared amongst multiple groups. The caveat with that is if you're not on Facebook and you don't pay attention, because there's a lot of people that have turned off a lot of the Facebook pages just because sometimes it's a little hard to read. If they're not on Facebook and not paying attention, they're not going to see the events. The city itself has had no interaction, no posting of meetings that these are happening on the city webpage.
Okay, okay, that's not what I was expecting to hear. Because usually a town hall, I mean, it's a pretty big deal, you want engagement from the public, good or bad, regardless of what aisle that you're in. Um, well, I'm gonna try to hear more about that or try to watch for more of those and see what comes from that. So from your perspective, or at least attending them, I mean, are we talking like a full house of people? I mean, is it like, 3, 5 people? I mean, is it a full room here or
I will say the first town hall had more people in it than the second town hall. Now, the second town hall, I will say, ran a little bit differently than the first town hall. The second town hall was listed to talk about certain topics such as Fate Yards, Lafayette Crossing, things like that. Citizens were able to get the mic, ask the questions, have dialogue back and forth. Um, so that one became a little bit more town hall, but I think the second one maybe had about 25, 26 people there. They're all taking place at a local church. Um, So, the, it's not a big space, but it's a decent sized space. But, I would love to have more people to come just to listen, because when you get recaps of what happens on town halls, you get the recap from the person's perspective that was there. And sometimes that's not the full story. I will always say there's two sides of a story and then what actually happened. So they are recorded, they are on YouTube. So anybody who wants to go back and watch them, they are linked to the mayor's candidate page. You can go on there, click them, and kind of watch at your leisure.
So, okay, so making sure I understand this, so you're saying that those town halls are recorded and they're not on the Fates city page?
No, they're on the mayor's personal candidate page, and I believe it's his YouTube account.
Okay, and so why is the city hall not available for these town halls?
That I'm not sure. I don't know because as far as I know from all the town halls that I've attended over the years, I don't believe I've ever been to a town hall in City Hall. I don't know if there is challenges to having town halls there. There is limited space, so if you got more than, say 50 people there, it might be a little bit crowded and a little bit tight to have a meeting there. There are certain topics that it might look not conducive to talk about sitting in City Hall. This the town halls that I've been to in the past have been at the Fate Community Center, which was the original place where uh, city council meetings were held. So this is the first time. It was probably about a year ago that I started seeing town halls forums held outside of Fate City property because the community hall is property, but this is being held at his current one is being held at a church, a local church. It's a beautiful church too.
Okay, we will keep a lookout, for that. Um, if you set personalities and politics aside, what do you believe are the biggest challenges and biggest opportunities facing fate over the next several years?
So I think there's two main points here. And one of them I kind of brought up before is Fate doesn't have an identity. When you say Fate, even when and I'm guilty of doing this too, when people say, "Hey, where do you live?" I turn around and say, "Oh, I live right next to Rockwall," because nobody knows where Fate is. Nobody knows it even exists. So I think that's an opportunity, but it's also an issue because without an identity, it's really hard to be proud of where you live. And then when people find if I turn around and tell somebody I live in Fate and you do a search for Fate, obviously the Google searches don't paint Fate in a very pretty light right now. So, in my opinion, it appears that we kind of like have a hodgepodge of what the neighboring cities have. And I think our elected officials should really be concentrating on developing that identity based on the businesses that are coming in, the demographic that we have, things like that, and that not just current demographics, but what is our targeted future demographics? And is that identity going to be able to be timeless? The other biggest issue, and this is going to be the biggest issue in the county, and we know this, right? It's obviously roads and traffic. It's always going to be a top issue. I know that keeps people up at night because they're trying to plan how much earlier do I have to leave for work. Fate is really unique because the majority of the thoroughfares are TxDOT controlled. So we don't have control over the three main roads that go through Fate, which is 35, 51, and 66. And I would love if our elected officials can be more involved in really fighting for that funding from TxDOT and really try to help get more funding to get those roads updated because every time I look at the thoroughfare plan, our roads get pushed back further and further and further. There are road consortiums. We don't get many updates on what's going on specific to Fate. We get them from the county commissioner's office, but I would love to have more information from our elected officials about what are you actually doing to try to make our roads a priority to the state of Texas because right now we're the smallest town in the smallest county in Texas.
That would be good information. I mean, their responsibility, your representation. Do you know who's your rep for that's supposed to be the member of the road consortium?
I do believe we have 2. I believe it is a Councilwoman Huffman, and I do believe the Mayor Greenberg is part of that, but I will be honest, I would have to verify that information, but when they did the latest, nominations for that, I do believe it was the 2 of them that were part to go to those road consortiums. even going down and lobbying, and we had gotten rid of our lobby group that kind of helps out fate. So, the elected officials that were up there said, "Hey, we would love to go do that." I would just love to get some updates on that.
Autumn, you served on Fate's Charter Review Commission twice. Looking back at everything that's happened over the past year, do you think the charter functioned the way it was intended? Were there areas where this experience exposed weaknesses or opportunities for improvement?
Well, I truly believe that nobody in a million years would have ever thought we would put every single portion of our charter to the test in the course of, one 365-day period. So basically, everything in our charter has been tested. When we built the charter, when we wrote the charter back in, the end of the first decade of 2000, it was great for a town of 5,000. Since that time, we have had one, two, three charter updates. Now, those charter updates that have happened have just been, oh, we found this issue, let's talk about it. We found this issue, let's talk about it. We've never done a full deep dive over the charter. And I believe while we do have a charter, it has all the main elements in it. I do believe there might need to be a full rewrite of the charter to bring it up to obviously current times, looking at some of the lessons learned over the years, such as the recall process itself. There was a great study put out by the University of Houston about charters, and it listed a bunch of things that home rule charters are lacking, have lacked, 85% of them have lacked this, certain elements such as there has to be a reason, there has to be a good reason for a recall. We've not only put this to the test 4 times this year, it's actually been 5. So we have had out of our 7 city council members, including the mayor, 5 of them have been up for recall this year. So there are definitely some things, and I would love to, kind of that can be an entire podcast on its own of what needs to be changed in the charter, but it did help guide the community through the recall process, but it also identified a lot of holes in the process where I think if it's strengthened, we might not be able to see 5 recalls in a year just because there'll be some more rigorous standards put around it.
You brought up a good point about the study from University of Houston, 'cause I read that a couple years ago because the city of McLendon-Chisholm decided to, uh, they decided to go the direction of trying to make us into a home rule and adopt a charter, and they had a committee and all kind of stuff, and at no point did anyone bring up about the study, which would have been helpful for everybody to understand some of the problems that obviously we're seeing what has transpired here. I don't believe it has helped, the city, in my personal opinion, just from what I've seen. You've actually increased costs, you've also added another person to the dais that really is not necessary, and then you just ultimately change the election period, and it's really and also, allowing the mayor to vote.
You didn't have that before?
No, we didn't. The mayor only voted whenever there was a tie. So, and it was very, it was problematic, consistently. And then this other issue that people really didn't understand the role of government, and most of those people that were on this particular committee were basically just copying and pasting from other charters, because ultimately they were tasked a certain way, but there was things that was brought up about ethics and transparency and, like, what you can and can't do and things of that nature, and I don't think people fully grasp the enormity of the issues because, again, they didn't serve on council before, or they didn't serve on P&Z, so they didn't see a lot of the mechanisms of how local government operates. And understanding the departments and, who they are supposed to be responding to, the city administrator or or depending on the type of government that you're issuing. And so there's a lot of issues with building a charter. There was a good point by someone who has seen public corruption just in general because of the type of work that he's in. He brought up that there should be an inspector general that should be completely a side office if you were to do a charter, okay? If you were to do a charter and you really were really trying to make sure that you're gonna weed out some of the transparency issues. I hate that buzzword now, I'm telling you. That inspector general would be, not part of the sheriff's office, not part of the DA's office, some sort of judicial hire for the city. This entire department or this person will be the person that would be investigating any issues of complaints that's related to local governing. And we don't have that. And I don't know if did is y'all's charter, do y'all have that? Do y'all have an inspector general?
We do not. So it's really interesting. So one of the main reasons I wanted to be on the charter review committee for 2025 is as I started seeing this downward spiral that it was kind of no holds barred. Our elected officials could say whatever they wanted to say and it didn't matter because, 100% they had their First Amendment rights. I also believe there's accountability with First Amendment rights, where if you're going to say something that is derogatory, things like that, you should be held accountable as an elected or even an appointed official. So our charter refers to a code of ethics only because fought to make it a requirement in our charter that at least our city council had to review our code of ethics every 2 years. So, that was the one thing that I was able to kind of say, I'm putting my foot in the ground. We need to have somebody look at this ethics ordinance, right? We had never used the ethics ordinance before, and then all of a sudden this year we have multiple ethical ethics complaints where it was determined that yes, basically what comes down to it is there's an ethics complaint that falls into very specific violations and the people who evaluate that and ultimately make the determination of the violations is the city council, who are the ones who are sometimes the subject of the ethics complaint.
This is that's where the inspector general would come into
Mhm.
effect because what you're saying right there, I didn't real so how many complaints are we talking here?
I think somewhere between January and March, we had ethics complaints against 3 council members and the mayor that were dismissed for valid reasons because inspection or the investigative report said there was no merit to the complaints. Then we had 2 more that came in for a council person which ended up in 2 censures. Then we had another one come in for the mayor that the city council dismissed it.
Who did the report?
So luckily for the investigative reports, our legal counsel, in our previous legal firm that we had as part of our city attorney, she had referred it out to outside counsel. So those investigative reports were done by a third party that had nothing to do with anything that was going on in Fate.
Well, okay, first off, I didn't expect to hear that the attorney referred it to another counsel. That's surprising to me. But you see my point though. I mean that
Mhm.
there needs to be someone else that is not on the council, especially if they're the subject of an ethics complaint.
And there's no part of the ordinance that says they have to recuse themselves from any of the discussion or any of the voting for the ethics complaint. They have to excuse themselves for as if they decide if they want to give authority to extend the length of the or the investigation process. That is the only thing that they actually have to recuse themselves from.
But so is that something that you think that could be a possible amendment in the code of ethics if it was reviewed again?
Yes, so they do have to review that every 2 years. There is talk that they are going to review that sooner rather than later because actually they only have about 10 more months to actually complete that review per the charter, or else they will be in violation of the charter because that was voted in May of 2025. There's been some concerns raised about members who have had ethics complaints against them and are in active recall campaigns making the changes to the ethics ordinance. So, there's that caveat that some citizens have raised. I would love and ultimately for this to go to an independent inspector general type role. Also, I've looked at a lot of neighboring communities and they actually have ethics boards that help with that, that are people who they're only convene when there is an ethics complaint. There's a caveat to that because a lot of times those become appointed positions and they get appointed by the city council. So, you kind of got to work that out a little bit. Do you want an ethics board that's appointed by a council that could potentially be up for ethics complaints? So, in my weird sense of humor, I'm like, what if we had like just anybody who wanted to be a part of it, put your name in the ring. And then, when it comes to if they need it, pull them out of a bucket like a jury pool. And so then there's no question of who's on the board and things like that. You apply, you commit your time, and it's a jury pool. And, maybe our city attorney would be the one to pick them all out of the hat, and that becomes your ethics board for that particular complaint.
Throughout our conversation, we've talked about ethics and public trust. One issue that repeatedly surfaced during public meetings involved audio recordings made by elected officials. Rather than simply describing those discussions, I want you to hear part of one of the public meetings yourself. Afterward, we'll talk about why this issue became so significant.
The information that's in there, again, as council people, we are supposed to protect the city, and I believe that some of the information that exists in those tapes would do harm to the city, and I will also be voting no and wanting to understand. Anyone who does vote for that potentially will open up the city for liability.
What's going on here? I mean, who is speaking?
So, speaking there, I do believe it was Councilman Mark Harper who has is no longer on council. He decided not to run for reelection. This was in regards to some audio recordings that were made by council members and mayors. There were audio recordings of council members recording other council members, mayors recording council members recording city staff. It was a lot. We're just jumping right into this, aren't we?
Right. Well, when I first learned about these recordings, I was surprised. Um, from your perspective, Autumn, why do you think this issue affected public trust so deeply?
That's a super interesting thing because if you actually there are two main recorders. And I don't want to call out names, things like that. Everybody's heard them, but negligible. They both are elected officials. We can just leave it at that. Both of them indicated on their recordings that A, they weren't recording, or B, if they ever found if that conversation had ever been recorded, it would be the end of their career. So it's to me, it's just interesting that that is the tactics they have taken, which, I'm not in their minds. I can only say, what they have said, which is their reason for their recordings, that, they wanted to make sure they had all the information. They were told that they should record these conversations. I'm not sure by who, but they were told to record the conversations to make sure the accurate information was captured. The only thing that I see those recordings have being done had basically cut, tore the city in half. It really hurts public trust to the point where I, have multiple friends who are civically involved, but they don't want to have verbal conversations. I mean, these are just regular citizens. They don't want to have verbal conversations with these people because they're afraid they're being recorded.
Mhm.
You know, in Texas is a one party consent state, that's fine and everything. But at some point, like if you're sitting in City Hall in your own office, you shouldn't have a fear that the person who has ultimate authority for hiring or firing you is recording your conversations and then lying about doing it.
Yeah, it seems like something like this could affect workplace morale. Is that a concern you've heard from residents?
Obviously, if you look at the timing of the recording, there was some things going on in fate regarding staffing. I don't want to dive too much into that. I don't know much because I'm out of the loop when it comes to that stuff because all of my open records requests have come back that they were redacted for, some of the information I was asking specific to some of the information that's alluded to. It's just hard. Like these recordings have now caused, I mean, in all essence, 5 recall attempts, 1 successful recall attempt, 4 in process. Every single ethics complaint that has been filed in the last year had to do with these recordings.
Oh, so from the conversations you've had with other residents, do you think this issue became such a focal point because it affected trust?
I can't speak for everybody. For me, that is not something that I would ever condone. It's not something that I would ever do, and the fact that it's happened and that, we actually have people that celebrate this, that this happened, and my mind immediately goes to city staff. I can't imagine working in an environment like that because, the recordings that I got from open records requests, they came redacted. So I can't imagine what's not redacted on there that city staff knows about, that they know that it's on there, or, if they heard the audios, the full unredacted audios. I have not. It was funny because I get told all the time, "How did you hear the unredacted audios?" I'm like, "Well, until you told me, I didn't know my audios were redacted. I thought
Mhm.
that was the whole audio until I went back and saw that it was edited." I'm like, "I didn't know there was any other audios besides these until it came out in, online blogger reports and things like that."
Yeah, well, one thing that comes to mind for me is employee retention. Cities depend on experienced professional staff. If trust within the organization begins to erode, that could make it harder to retain those employees.
And I agree, and our city runs very lean. I don't have the actual numbers. I have some of the older numbers where we have for city staff, it's like 3 to every 1,000. Now, those are some older numbers. I don't have the more up to date numbers. And we have some very talented people on our staff. Whether we want to say it or not, we have lost some very good staff members recently. Um, I'm not going to say that it has anything to do with this. We had a phenomenal finance department. And, one went for retirement. We also lost, one of the employees that was on those recordings. I have never asked this question. I cannot say that that's why they left, and I will never make that insinuation. But, timing, optics is everything. And when you start seeing multiple employees leave over time, in a very tumultuous time, as a citizen, I get concerned because we have some really great people that work on our city staff, and I don't want to lose them because they are amazing people for what they have to do.
Hey, I have another audio clip that raises another issue that residents discussed publicly over the past year. Before we continue our conversation, let's listen to another excerpt from another city council meeting.
I do believe that all of our elected and appointed officials should work to bring down the toxicity that has been plaguing our city. And yes, that includes me asking individuals to refrain from going online and speaking out against somebody that they have to work with. Not only is it just bad taste, but it leaves the impression in anyone's mouth, any citizen's mouth, Are the people that we have elected and are those that are appointed making the best decisions for fate? Are they making decisions because they disagree with somebody on another board, another commission, or sitting at this council? If this is seen as threatening, again, you will wish to recall me, and I have provided you for public consumption that I did, in fact, ask somebody to resign.
What was that about?
So, as part of the recall process, each member that is up for recall has the option to have a public hearing to kind of lay out their case. There has been some m- accounts where that was actually the mayor speaking during his hearing, where he actually asked somebody to resign. Personally, I was told I was on the Planning and Zoning Commission for 2 years. I will be honest, I am very, critical of some of our elected officials. I ask about facts and that gets looked at as critical. And I was told that I would not be reappointed if I did not keep myself in line and stop saying mean things. That is some of the insinuations that citizens have made, or, appointed board members, or even, elected officials, because there is a story out there that that was part of a previous recall, that an elected official was asked to resign for being mean from the dais, from online things like that. So basically, it's an interesting topic just because our elected officials do not have the ability to remove board members, and I feel like there's been a shift in that where, some people feel like they can remove board members. We do know in town halls, the mayor has not been quiet about wanting to potentially be a strong mayor system, as opposed, because right now we are a weak mayor, strong city manager system. So that gives everybody pause that, you know, he feels that he can essentially remove people or ask people to leave. And that's not, you can have disagreements in discourse and things like that, but when does that become a step too far?
The next clip raises a different issue, this time involving executive sessions, legal advice, and confidential information. Let's listen.
I think transparency. I applaud agenda item 6G as well. I think that there are, as we heard tonight, there are some concerns from citizens, especially regarding what we pay people to know what we don't know, and how would we, if there seemed to be any kind of disparity on decisions that were made versus information that was presented. I do think that those deliberations that we discussed in executive session bring light and merit to that, especially when there are conflicting. One of the things that was brought up was legal conclusions. Well, if those legal conclusions are different, say between an attorney, a city attorney, versus one doing the ethics investigation versus the attorney general's office, I think that would help supplement the overall discussion on this and lead to much more transparency of the issue at hand.
Mayor, if I might.
Sure.
And I'd like to speak on items 8, let's see, where are we? 6G and H at the same time, because it's the same comment. I would strongly encourage the council to stop the practice of waiving the attorney-client privilege. That privilege is very, very important. It encourages full and frank discussions so that y'all can get the best possible legal advice and make the best possible decisions you can. Private people, you talk about transparency, but private people and private companies have attorney-client privilege and don't have to have their client discussions occur in public or be waived. That's why the Texas law protects attorney-client privilege, even for governmental entities. It's why we allow people to have those discussions in executive session and not open session. And so I would strongly encourage the council not to waive the attorney-client privilege with regards to the discussions that happened on June 1st, or waive the attorney-client privilege for purposes of the memos that were given to you on June 1st. I think it's a very dangerous practice, and as I've told you before, and I'll continue to tell you, you'll need to quit doing that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Where I come from on this is the issue of, while I understand and respect the idea of businesses that are coming in and looking, this is obviously something that citizens want to know. I would say especially when council members are filing ethics complaints against fellow council members. I think that obviously shows that that there's something going on, a disagreement, even if it's on something that isn't necessarily going to be any more than a potential sanction or just a dismissal. But when that happens, it makes it very difficult to have a meaningful conversation on where that exists. Also, I think, especially with these specific ethics complaints, a lot of it does deal at the very heart of how much information do you think that the public has a right to know? Do you think they have just a little bit of a right? Would you hide things from the public that you think is best that they don't know? What is a definition of confidential by law versus what we wish would be confidential? So I think this underscores a much larger argument that clearly our city wants to have right now.
You're really throwing these at me, aren't you?
Well, one of the issues raised during this meeting involved medical information, uh, and maybe an open records request and some other items discussed in executive session. But before we get into the specifics, can you help explain what privacy protections generally apply in situations like this?
So in healthcare world, that's HIPAA, but to full transparency, oh, there's that word again. HIPAA does not apply to government entities. HIPAA only applies to healthcare entities. So there's other guidance and things like that that would apply to city governments, employees, things like that, such as the Texas Medical Practice Act. That's part of the occupational code, and then ADA itself.
Okay.
So that's what applies there. And at the time that this conversation was happening, we didn't have any of that information. In subsequent meetings and with the release of those documents that they released, we do know that this had to do with some kind of healthcare information. So one of the reports that was released directly alluded to that on the report that they released. That information was not redacted. It took me about 17 days to get it. Unfortunately, that document got into somebody else's hands within 4 days of them releasing privilege. I'm not sure if we all got the whole document because that had gotten sent out somehow. And then subsequent meetings, such as the July 17th meeting, was it July 17th? It was the July 6th meeting where they had come out of executive session and alluded again to some healthcare information, such as obituaries, things like that. So we had already had that information in our hands. What's interesting about this particular meeting, when they did this waiving, I am all for give me as much information as I can get my hands on. Paper, I like documents. I like to be able to read something instead of, listening to opinions, things like that. This particular meeting, not only were they waiving the investigative report for the mayor, plus the reports of sufficiency for two other complaints for councilman, well, that at that time when they were doing that, it was ex-councilman Harper and ex-councilman Chin. uh, there was a second motion to waive the discussions that happened in executive session 2 weeks prior. And I thought that was a very unique thing. The woman's voice that you heard talking was our city attorney. It's a very unique thing to try to waive a discussion that is not recorded. There's no minutes of the meeting. There's just, because it was an executive session, there's just a certified agenda of what they talked about, but not the contents of that. I believe because they waived the discussion points, but there's no record of what those discussion points are. I agree. It sets a very dangerous precedent because who is going to be able to say, no, that's not what you talked about? Because nobody's going to know because there's no written proof of anything that happened in those meetings.
So wouldn't the city attorney advise the city council, "Hey, this is not information that should be sent out."
that response, the woman's voice in that recording, that is our city attorney telling them, pretty much paraphrasing, "I've told you this before, you gotta stop doing this." And they continue to do it, contrary to any more recent topics that have come up. This is a constant. I go to almost every single meeting that I can, and that wording, I advise against it in open meeting. Not a, I don't even know what happens in executive session. In open meetings, we've heard it multiple times. Don't talk about this. I advise you not to release this. And it's been happening for months.
Wow, I didn't think it was happening for months. So, what you're describing is a situation where legal advice wasn't being given publicly, yet they were still disagreements over whether to follow that advice.
And when it comes down to it, and I'll just make this point real quick, as elected officials, I applaud more information to the public. Give us more information. Let us know what's going on. The problem is the information we're getting isn't coming from the city council. It's coming from documents that get put online by somebody who has nothing to do with city government. And then on top of that, we get to the point where the citizens start questioning, how is this all going out not on the city website? If you're going to release something against attorney advice, why wouldn't it first go on the city website? What if make it open to everybody, not having to go to a certain Facebook page or things like that to find that stuff out. And I think it sets you're an elected official. This is the type of decision that you have to make, and as an elected official, that's why you're elected. As P and Z, I sat through TOMA training and executive session training, even though as P and Z, I don't think we ever did it once, but we know what those lines are, and I just feel like if we're going to start waiving everything, why are we going into executive session? If there is a chance that you're going to waive confidentiality for an executive session, do it before you go in. So at least we can kind of see what goes on instead of hoping that we hear the correct story when you come out.
Well, I think, I had another audio where, I think it was some sort of hearing that was being taken place for one of the council members. It doesn't matter who. What matters is that the city attorney, I think her name was Jennifer,
Mhm.
repeated over and over again, like, "Hey, I advise against you commenting on this," you know, and she repeated it over and over again. She was very adamant.
Oh yes, I remember that meeting. It was a lot.
This next public comment came from resident Karen Kaiser during a city council meeting. I thought she raised several broader questions about governance, legal advice, and public trust. Let's listen.
And, I did not know until yesterday that for Texas Open Meetings Act, there is no mandatory reason to go into closed session. If I had been taking a quiz, I would have thought purchasing real estate so you don't, skew your deal, certain employee matters for their privacy concerns, and pending or existing litigation. Um, but no, there's not a one that's mandatory. And I have seen many times in recent months, probably since that magical November that you mentioned often, Mayor, in your second town hall, and you're going into closed session for hours, hours at a time for conversations to happen in there that the citizen in me knows should be happening right where you're seated because the public doesn't get a vote, but we have the right to hear. You're not discussing thing again, there's no reason that you have to be in closed session. You're choosing. And I have found in life, and everyone jokes I'm old, there's not many old people in this young city. I have found in my lifetime involvement in local government, those who say the two words open and transparent the most frequently are typically neither. So you speak often. from the leadership on down of how open and transparent. I think today would be a great start. Everyone knows that something was brewing between the law firm and your not once, not twice, repeated refusal to follow legal advice. And since there is no TOMA legality requiring you to be in, you're not discussing anybody's salary. You're discussing what happened. The citizens of fate that will listen today, not many here because they're probably at work, many will listen in the future when this video stream gets replayed. They have absolutely the right to know what happened because you're the flippant way I've heard it described of like happening in cities all over Texas. No, it's not. And the letter that I concur with our citizen, Ms. Beard, it sickens me that I have to go on the website of someone I could not disrespect more. I don't think he's a journalist. I don't even know that it's a blogger. He hates our city. He speaks hatefully of people that I admire and respect that have served this city for 14 years longer than all of you all. And I have to get this letter off of clicking on his page. I don't care if he gets a dime or a dollar for it. I care that I have to go there and see his filthy pictures and all of his nasty bias slant. But this letter defies the way you described it, Mayor and others. Unfortunately, we're at a point where we can no longer continue to represent the city. That sentence tells you this wasn't lighthearted. This wasn't a minimum matter. This was huge. We've watched it build over months, and you need to have your meeting open and transparent in the public and let us all hear it. Thank you.
Well, Karen raised several issues there. Autumn, what stood out to you most from her comments?
Yes. So, I mean, when it all comes down to it, we will, as citizens and our leadership, won't know why the law firm left, right? We can only make observations of what we've seen over the past couple of months. You've played recordings of repeated not following um, attorney advice. We've seen lots of things get released or executive privilege waived or deliberative privilege waived or confidential privilege waived. It depends on what the word of the week is. And then go to places that, we shouldn't have to go to get city information. What I will say is, and this is in my opinion, one single event that led to our city law firm terminating the agreement. When you have the head of that law firm show up to multiple meetings over the last 2 months of your city council meetings, you would be remiss to think that something wasn't up. Does
And
that make sense?
yeah,
When you have the head honcho coming and listening to meetings and participating in meetings, it's not just because somebody was out sick.
right, right. Well, one question that this raised for me involves the Public Information Act. If different people receive the same documents at different times, how does that affect public confidence in this particular process?
I've read up on TOMA and the Public Information Act, and I feel like I could probably recite them word for word at this point. Um, Unfortunately, if a document gets out to the public prior to the city evaluating it, the city attorney evaluating it, the AG evaluating it for information, if that information gets out to the public prior to it going through that process, it pretty much negates any process that it would go. They can't take it back,
Mhm.
you know? And so when some of these documents, I do believe, in my opinion, that had some of these documents not gotten out through nefarious ways, we would have seen more redactions on those documents, whether it was warranted or not. Once the document is out in the public, you can't turn around and send it to somebody else redacted. but it
Mhm.
does put the city at a very precarious position because there is no discrimination allowed as part of the Public Information Act. So if somebody gets a document 1 day, 2 days, 3 days after it's released, and another you make another person wait 17 days for that same document, it does put the city at a little bit of a liability because they're not treating each open records request the same.
Mhm.
And that is a violation of the Public Information Act.
Whoever serves as the next legal counsel will inherit many of these issues. And so, looking ahead to the upcoming election, do you think these issues surrounding ethics and governance will influence how residents evaluate these upcoming candidates? Uh, and then, from what you observed, have you seen any acknowledgement that mistakes were made by some of the city council members or even the mayor?
I personally have not. I cannot say that they haven't said that. I have not. Alls I've heard was this was the best decision that we can make in the spirit of transparency. There is a little bit more research that I'm doing about some things that have come out recently. How did somebody know that these recordings existed before anybody else? And that's kind of like one of the things I'm researching right now because I feel like there's more to the story in the fact that the very first person who got these recordings or portions of these recordings was the same person who tends to get all of our documents before anybody else.
Hmm. So, looking ahead, I mean, and as Spate prepares for the November election, I mean, what qualities would you like to see voters prioritize when evaluating candidates? I mean, what are some important things that they should be focused on?
Obviously, I will always say, when you go on to city council, when you go to any board, you are not an expert unless you've been doing this for years and years and years. So there is going to be a learning curve, but my top four things that I would say would be the qualities that I would want to see is the ability to relate to all citizens. So you don't have to agree with all of the citizens, but you have to be relatable to them. We do have some great relatable people on the council currently, uh and then there's some that people just don't wanna talk to. They're scared to talk to you. You can't have somebody scared to talk to you. So, you have to be able to relate to them. I do believe even though you're not gonna know everything, you need to have some kind of civic and business acumen. Um, Anybody who starts showing up to city council meetings because they've decided to run, have you really learned enough about what actually happens to be able to make that decision? So, I'm going to look for a candidate who has attended city council meetings for, a significant I'm at almost all of them, so I know who shows up. So those are the people that I'm going to look for. You don't have to participate in the meeting, just be there, be present, listen.
Mhm.
Uh, you know, Communication, the ability to communicate with citizens in a calm yet non-demeaning manner and getting city information out in a civilized way, never would I have ever thought this would be a quality that I would have to say I look for in a candidate, but here we are. So, and then obviously you got to display morality, you got to display integrity, and you have to be ethical. And you can't evaluate a lot of those until afterwards, but, campaigns say a lot about people. If you're going to, be able to have hidden forums and things like that, is that allowing you to talk to the masses? Things like that. So those are going to be like my four things that I would prioritize in evaluating candidates. And, they're not going to be perfect. They're not going to be the most knowledgeable people in the world, but they have to have a willingness to talk to people, learn the job, and act with morality, integrity, and ethical principles.
That's good to hear. And I'm all for that. I'm glad that you're thinking proactively on that. And I brought this up in past conversations. Is like the agendas. I mean, are all the council members opening up that laptop or the I don't I what device are they using these days in Fate?
Have laptops and phones.
Oh, so they do have a laptop.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So are they opening it up? Are they preparing for the meeting? This has been a running problem. In multiple cities, we have council members that are not prepared. They don't read the agenda packet. They don't even know what they're voting for. They're not prepared. And so I'm hoping that we're going to start seeing people that are actually going to study up and have time to if they have questions or concerns or they don't understand the subject matter, they're going to reach out to the staff, right?
That would be wonderful. I can't say what our current council or what previous councils have done in the past. You know, I can say there are times, and not with this current council because I just don't reach out to them as much. Previous councils, like if I saw an agenda item and I, had a question about it, I know if I called somebody and started talking about it, and I could tell off the bat if they even knew what I was talking about. Does that make sense? Or have a conversation and it was more of a help me understand this agenda item. And, I was never asking for anything, opinion, anything like that. Just help me understand what I'm reading here. And they would, but you could tell the people who did that, and then you can tell the people who, you know, ask, extraneous questions during an agenda item that have nothing to do with the agenda item, or even make comments saying, oh, this person who was making a public comment rattled off all these numbers from the city charter, from ordinances, and now I have to go look them up because I don't even know what she was saying.
Okay, so if you could leave the listeners with one message, what would it be?
It might be a little bit of a longer message, but it's short, sweet, but there's a lot of points. These are the points that go through all my head. I get asked all the time, why do you want to be so involved? And it's just because I don't understand why people wouldn't want to be involved, but I'm at a different point in my life, right? So, it's get engaged because it's free to learn information. It's not, you don't have to go talk to meetings. You can watch meetings online or hear snippets. The city has a great format on YouTube where after a day it breaks it down by agenda item. So if there's a question about a certain agenda item, you can go there. Get involved if you're compelled. Don't let 600 people determine the future of fate. And at the end of the day, everybody should vote. I don't care who you vote for. It pains me that we have under 10% voting in fate
Mhm.
in a town of almost 30,000 people.
Yeah, there you go. That's a good message. I like it. I like it. Okay, so lightning round. What is one hidden gem in Faith that everyone should visit?
I know a lot of the focus happens on downtown fate, and there's some great things in downtown fate, but I will scream this from the highest mountain. We have a local coffee shop bookstore called Leather and Bound. I know, don't let the name scare you. But the owner of this store, she is amazing. Everything in her store, if it's books, she has local authors, indie authors. Her coffee comes from, she has it specifically roasted by a resident of Fate, who owns Poor Carry Coffee. He exclusively brings in all of her coffee. She has another local tea maker by Man Provisions who brings in specially curated, and I don't know how you curate tea and make blends of teas, but he does it for her. The nicest people. It's just a very indie coffee shop bookstore that has events every night, and everybody should go in there once just to see what it is. And if they don't have the book you like, she will order the book that you like. It is just the most amazing, welcoming place that I have ever been.
I actually have never heard of it. Leather and Bound.
And don't let the name fool you. Leather and bound as in books. Books, that kind of thing.
Very clever. Okay, so Autumn, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences, your perspective, and your heart for the city of Fate. One thing I hope our listeners take away from today's conversation is that local government isn't just about council meetings or election cycles, it's about people. It's about neighbors working together, asking thoughtful questions, staying informed, and building communities we're proud to call home. Whether you live in Fate, Rockwall, Royce City, McLendon-Chisholm, Heath, Rowlett, or anywhere else across Rockwall County, your voice matters. Local government works best when residents stay engaged, participate respectfully, and hold their leaders and themselves to a higher standard. If you enjoyed today's episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who enjoys staying connected to what's happening in our local communities. It really helps more people discover this show. You can also find my articles, local guides, podcast episodes, and community updates anytime at adriennebalkum.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and never underestimate the difference one informed resident can make. I'm Adrienne Balkum, and thanks for listening to The Adrienne Balkum Show.